Hello, everyone. Yes, we're all there. Thank you again for joining us. Today, we're doing another live stream with Phil and Kam. I am Frederick, and we have a special guest joining us, John Calder. And for those who don't know him, he's retired from Acoustic Geometry, but he still does consulting of room treatment and acoustics. He is also a successful musician and has dived back into the creation of cinematic instrumental original music. Hi, John. I believe it was 4 years ago when you joined us for a session on acoustic treatments, right?
Yep, I think so. Somewhere in there. Am I there?
Yes, you are, sir. How are you?
I'm super good. How are you guys?
Excellent.
Great.
So Frederick, thank you for joining. I know it's in the evening. It's in the morning for you, correct? Because you always forget.
It's morning, 9 a.m. That's right. Yep.
Okay. So as we wanted to do, we wanted to do a revisit a topic that was quite popular a few years ago about this basically acoustic treatments and room acoustics. Now, we could go down the rabbit hole, but we're not going to do that because
Oh yeah, we will.
we're gonna because me and John will get here and start talking about we'll go if we get a little too crazy, Cam and the rest of the team can pull us back. What we want to talk about is there's lots of different ways that you can improve the performance of your system by just making some changes to your room. But in order to understand what type of changes or what type of things you can do to your room, the first thing we have to talk about is how a speaker interacts in a room and how the room affects sound, and then what we can do to correct that. So John, talk a little bit about what is the benefit? What does room acoustics normally do? What are we trying to do with room acoustics? That's just really basic. If I asked you that question.
Really basic. The best way to think of sound in a room is to think of a source, either loudspeakers or a trumpet or a drum set or whatever, something emanating sound. And then the room itself is a transmission line. That's where the sound is going through. And then your ears and your brain are the receiver. So it's like a radio. There's a radio station, there's the airwaves, and then there's what you hear. Your brain can do pretty well at hearing sound if you give it a chance. And so room acoustics is basically all about evening out the sound in the room from whatever the source is, either recording it or playing it back or concerts or whatever. So all we're really trying to do is knock some of the room problems down enough that your brain can get a handle of it and make sense of it.
Okay, which makes perfect sense. So if you look at this room, we are actually, Cam and I are actually sitting in our reference hi-fi room, which John actually designed. And we'll talk a little bit more about those panels that are behind us. And while a lot of these panels look very similar, each panel does a different job. So there's a combination of reflection, absorption, diffusion, different types of diffusion that is actually in this room to have that fine balance that it kind of removes most the room from the equation. You don't want the room to be so dry that the music sounds lifeless, but you also don't want it to have too many things bouncing around where the sound is actually smeared. Now, most of you are not going to have, I don't know how much this costs. I never asked John. I just signed the check and turned my head.
I've done more expensive rooms than that, actually.
But this room could be kind of expensive. But there are some basic things that we need to talk about that you can do to improve the room that you live in. Because my spouse, I don't think, Cam, your spouse is going to let you wrap the entire room in gray fabric. I don't think that's going to happen.
But this is nice looking, though.
It's nice looking. So let's talk about the first thing that we need to tackle. And a lot of times, if you go to a room and you clap your hands and you hear like echoes and things like that, that has to do with all the reflections that are in the room. So let's talk about the first thing that you can do, or the first one that you can impact. And that is how basically reflections. And that's, normally we talk about reflections, mid-range, vocals, high frequencies. So if you bring up the slide, there's sound that comes directly from the speaker, and that's the green, right? but then that sound will bounce off hard surfaces, whether that surface is the ceiling, the floor, or the walls. And often those first reflections arrive close to the same time as the directed sound, and it tends to smear the image. So the vocals seem blurrier. It doesn't seem as refined. So the first thing you want to do is try to tackle these first reflections, right? And like I said, those first reflections can come from all types of all different places. So the first thing that we can do is, John, what is an absorption? Talk about absorption, and you have a pretty good way of explaining what absorption does. So why don't you explain that real quick?
An absorber basically is like a little hole in the wall, and it lets some of the sound out of the room so that it doesn't reflect back in. And that's really what we're after. We want to reduce the amount of reflection. We don't want to remove them. We want to do them evenly across all frequencies wherever possible. And we also want to mix absorption with diffusion, which we'll get into later. But basically what you're trying to do is reduce the level of direct reflected sound versus direct sound. It's the reflected sound arriving later that interferes with the direct sound from the speakers. In this case, we'll talk about speakers. We're not going to talk about drum sets or guitar amps or anything. Although we could, and go down that big rabbit hole. Basically, we're talking about, let's talk about stereo. You've got two speakers in the room. The sound is coming directly to your ears from those speakers. And it's also bouncing off the walls. Now, it's also bouncing off the ceiling and the floor. We probably aren't going to do much to treat the floor. You can put carpet on it, doesn't do much. The ceiling is a great big flat surface. And so the flat surfaces of the walls and the flat surface of the ceiling are really good reflectors. Almost all the energy that hits that wall comes reflecting off. And so you really need to knock that down, or it's just like a little tiny close echo. It makes what's called comb filtering, which removes some frequencies. It smears the sound, it smears the imaging, and it does bad things to the sound. Again, we're not talking about absorbing all reflections. An anechoic space, which is a room with no sound reflections at all, used for testing, is a really unearthly experience. You don't want to do that. So you want to treat the first reflection points first. It's the first and worst, as we're fond of saying.
Exactly. So that
First and worst.
First and worst. So there's two ways. So we talked about absorption, and the other one is diffusion, and we'll get a little bit more in detail. But basically, if I was going to say that, and then we'll get more into it. We're gonna take that reflection and we're going to scatter it, right? So it spreads it out. So
that's what diffusion does. Absorption basically knocks the reflection down. So it's going to be still reflecting. It's just going to drop it. A diffuser scatters it. The absorber just knocks down that the reflection that's coming right to you.
And I've noticed that when we first built this room, we needed more diffusion. So when we first put the room, it was very accurate, but it didn't have kind of a life or soul. It didn't have a sense of scale when we played music because it was too dry. So you actually went back in and designed some other panels, and we came in and swapped a bunch of panels. This is the second version of this room, and people talk about how the sound the sound seems to be bigger than the room that we're actually playing it in, and a lot of that has to do with how well John designed the diffusion to go in here. Now,
so are we going to dive more into the diffusers that we have on our first reflection points? Is that later?
Yeah, we're gonna go into that later.
Okay.
So first we just talk about the conversation. Then I'm gonna have Cam had to hang off all of these, and they had to go in a certain combination. It was like a giant erector set, and I'll show you pictures of that. So
Cam, you're the guy who hung all that. Thank you. That was a lot of work.
So I'm gonna give you the quickest tip on how to find your first reflections. Right?
Handheld mirror.
There we go. This is the first reflection. This is the first reflection measurement tool right here. Because sound travels, if you go back to the picture, it kind of travels like your line of sight. So what happens is if I could see the speaker, I would sit in my room, go back to that image, and I would sit on the couch, and I would give this to Kam, and Kam would slide that mirror along the wall until he could see the speaker in the mirror. And then we put a piece of tape there. This is cavemanish. John did it with freaking calculations and everything else. This is the caveman approach, right? The next one is you would do it on the left side, you would do it on the right side, you could do it on the floor, and you can do it on the ceiling. You could do it on the back walls. You could do it on the front walls, right? And as you slide that mirror around, you will see and find those first reflections. And then you could put a piece of, you normally put a piece of blue tape there. And then you can say
painter's tape.
Painter's tape.
Right where you see the tweeter.
Yeah, yes. Exactly. So so now you go, okay, these are probably going to be where those first reflections are going to come. And now, of course, we say that, John, we're talking about that carpet isn't the best solution for a floor, but you'll be amazed. Like even in we have 2 rooms in this building, and they're identical. The only difference between the 2 rooms is the ceiling is padded and there's carpet in one room, and the other room has an exposed ceiling with hard surfaces and a concrete floor. One is an echo chamber, and the other one is dramatically better. So while carpet is not
one thing we should talk about.
Yes.
And it's important at this point because there's two issues. When we diagram a room and the reflections and everything else, it does make it look like sound is a little laser beam. Mm-hmm. It actually isn't. It's much more like an expanding balloon. Mm-hmm. But it does so at different frequencies. At low frequencies, it expands omnidirectionally. It will expand throughout the room. At mid and high frequencies, it starts beaming down. And so when we see these diagrams of bounced sound, it is bouncing everywhere in the room. And so it's a bit of a misleading thing. We all know that that's what's happening. It's going everywhere in the room. But for people to understand fully what's going on, high frequencies typically narrow way down. It's just the laws of physics. Mm-hmm. And so some of those aren't being reflected all the way. And so a carpet or thinner material can absorb some of those high frequency sounds and deaden that real high ringing. The other thing that happens in a room is you basically, when you put up 2 or 4 inches of a fiberglass type material or a shredded cotton or something on the first reflection or wherever, it's going to knock down mid-range and high frequencies, but do nothing on the low frequencies. So one of the aspects we'll talk about later is how do we deal with low frequencies in rooms, because you can't absorb them or diffuse them except a certain way. And so we'll get to that, but understand that a lot of this is frequency based.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So as we're saying, this reflected mirror normally a lot of times will help your vocals, your high frequencies, right? So those are actually the easiest things to tackle. The bass is where it becomes a problem. So we use our little mirror to work on the high frequencies, right? But bass is different. So can you bring up my slide, and can you talk a little bit about the challenges with bass? What are bass nulls and peaks and dips, and why do you get this uneven bass response?
The physics of bass are really interesting, and they're being more understood every year. Essentially, because sound waves have a wavelength. So 1130 hertz, or that many frequency shifts per second, is a wavelength of 1 foot. Sound moves at 1130 feet per second at sea level at 70 degrees. And the wavelength of 1130 hertz is 1 foot. 100 hertz is a lot bigger. And 40 hertz, which is the low E on a bass guitar or an orchestral bass, is longer than most room dimensions. At some point, you basically get below a certain frequency called a room crossover. You can no longer diffuse the sound, and it can't develop a full wavelength. Doesn't mean you can't hear bass. It simply means that the room dimensions are now messing with the bass. If you go right in the middle of the room, it may null. You may not hear any bass. And if you move to a quarter space in the room, you may hear twice to 4 times as much bass as you do anywhere else. So placement in a room is very tricky. Subwoofer placement is still debated hotly among audiophiles. But
Yeah,
so
everyone says like putting it in corners, but it's wrong. You not necessarily put it in, because those are not necessarily the most problematic areas. It's the flat surfaces, the parallel surfaces that are the problematic ones, right?
well, and that's something that we talk about often is standing waves. Parallel surfaces develop a bounce echo between them at many different frequencies, but the distance between your walls and the ceiling and floor are your primary mode frequencies. At those frequencies, you will get great additions and great subtractions throughout the room. And so what that graphic was showing you was a computer plot at a specific frequency in that room with those 2 speakers, and you can see hot spots and dead areas. If you're sitting at that blue valley there, you're not hearing much of that frequency, not bass, that frequency. If you're sitting at the couch at the back of the room, you're hearing way too much. And so in recording studio design, you try and even all that out. And you can do that with a number of techniques. Primarily what we do is we use diaphragmatic low frequency absorbers to reduce that interaction with the room a little bit. But a crossover frequency generally is between 150 to 200 hertz in a room. Above that, you can absorb, you can diffuse, you can deal with it. Below that, you've got to deal with diaphragmatic absorbers.
Yeah. So John, there's that goes back to people go, well, why there's this, it's kind of like this, there's 3 parts to this.
Yep.
It's the room, it's treating the room for number 1, place the speakers in the proper location. Yep. Number 2, or the best location possible for your sitting position. As John mentioned, that dip was only for 1 frequency. So the goal is to try to find the best position. So when at the primary sitting position, you get the smoothest bass across the most frequencies in that spot. That's the goal. After you do that, there are Odyssey, Dirac, active bass control, Dirac active room treatment. There's all of these other acoustical things to go on. Interesting thing, John. Dirty Films was asking, what about a room with windows? The funny thing about it, you open the window, you have a absorption. You close the window, you have a very reflective surface. So the window could do 2 things at the same time.
It can be 3. Actually, the window might rattle a lot.
It could be 3.
And if you put big enough curtains on it, you could actually help. You can actually do a little bit of a minor amount of absorption. So if we go back into here, I always say, let's tackle the first thing is, your placement of your speakers are more likely going to be based on, like I said, putting them in the spot that's going to give me the smoothest bass response in the largest area, especially the listening position. Yep. That's the first thing, right? Then you go, okay, that's the best bass I'm going to get organically. Mm-hmm. Then I can use my mirror to try to find those first reflections, which are the high frequencies and the upper mid range, and then figure out ways to fix that. And then, John, we'll get into the science a little later about the fancy bass traps that are in this room, which are basically gigantic bass shock absorbers that we're using to flatten out, to even out the bass.
I wish I'd have thought of that back when I was the marketing director. I had a huge shock absorber.
Exactly. So that would be the first path I would take. Now, of course, room dimensions and shapes have an impact on that as well. But many of us are not going to build a room like this from scratch. This room was built from scratch for this environment. And the contractor still didn't follow our instructions. And Eric McBride said, this room is 2 feet too long. And why did you put a raised floor in here? So he's still not happy with this room. Everybody else thinks it sounds great. And he's like, meh. He could have done it better. And I'm sure John, if I gave John just the raw blueprints and this thing was framed, and he probably would have came up with some different dimensions.
Well, one thing that's important to remember also is the size of your room, as well as the dimensions, have a great effect on the sound in the room. If your room is very small, the room I'm sitting in is tiny. I need a lot of diffusion, and we'll get into the reason for that. But we also need a little more absorption, because as the room size decreases, its resonant frequencies, its modes, go up in frequency. And so rather than having a large room like the one you guys are sitting in, with modes at a fairly low frequency, you start getting into the lower range of a male singing voice, and it starts messing up a lot of things. And so in some cases, smaller rooms need more treatment, and you wouldn't think so, but it is one of those weird axioms of physics that sometimes you need more in a smaller room.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So now there's a couple different things that the companies that make examples of room treatments, right? So first, let me show you some of the more professional type things. And we have examples of all three of these actually in this space. And then there's another one that's not even on this list. So the first thing is fabric absorption, and that's more like you said, John, the mid to high frequency type solution, right?
It's fiberglass typically, or it can be recycled shredded cotton. It can be mineral wool. There's a lot of different items you can put in a room. Curtains on a window will do a little bit. A couch will absorb some sound. It's mostly fabric-based, and fabric-based absorbers, in the professional terms, are velocity-based absorbers. They tend to slow the sound down, which reduces its energy. As you drive a car less fast, you're using less energy. These things have friction inside them because of all the fabric, because of all the shredded, either fiberglass or cotton or whatever. And they tend to slow the sound down and knock down that reflection.
Exactly. So here, now, of course, ours are, if you look at in our space, they're all gray. And then they're red now because of producer Nick put red lights on it. But the room is gray, people.
It's really gray.
It's really gray. And you could actually see that if we turn off the lights in here, that this is actually a gray room, not a red room.
I think the design team had a lot to do with that.
Oh yeah, they wanted the gray fabric to match the gray
there you go.
paint.
Turn off the lights.
And then they wanted the gray fabric to match the gray paints. They didn't want to have a panel and then a wall and a panel. So some of these panels are just reflection, just hard surfaces, because that mimics a wall, but it all kind of matches. Now, if you go back to that drawing, there are companies like even Acoustic Geometry, Glick Acoustics, Snow Sound. A lot of acoustic companies also can print on this fabric, and then now you can end up using artwork and things like that. So we have panels that are red, we have panels that are gray, we have panels with logos on them. You can put artwork on them. So there's a lot of ways that you can do to utilize and improve to make it look blend in, so it doesn't have to look like a hi-fi room. The nice thing about it is if you look at the picture in the middle, that picture in the middle, it's just a couple of big panels right in the middle here. Remember, we just need to tackle, the first thing we're trying to tackle is those first reflections. So if you know where if you're lucky enough to be one person, it's the Maxell commercial, and you're sitting on the couch, and you just want to optimize it for that spot, this spot right here on this couch, how much treatment I have to put into the room is going to be a lot different than if I'm trying to fix and clean up first reflections for wider 3 rows of seats and things like that. So once you know that, you could put literally 2 panels on the wall, some panels on the ceiling. It'll sound great right there, when it comes to your high frequencies mid-range, but don't go sit in the other chair.
It's interesting. There are not a lot of anymore. There used to be a number of recording studio control room designers that would design specifically for the hotspot seat. That's where the recording engineer sat, and he sometimes gave it up to the producer or the lead singer, but that was the only place in the room that it was optimized for, which back in the day, was actually doing okay. But these days, you really want a much wider spread of an optimal listening space, because even if you're alone in there, you may want to move around a little bit, or you may want to have friends over or something like that.
Yeah.
And in home theater spaces, it's especially important to even out the sound. And so while we do talk a lot about first reflection points for one given listening space, what we really want to do is make sure that we're maybe a little wider with that absorber, or maybe a more diffusion in the room, so that everybody has a chance to hear it as it should be.
Exactly. Now, the other thing too is there's absorption. This is another company that does absorption. There's diffusers. There's the really nice looking ones that look like pieces of different wood blocks in different depths and heights, or like they look like fins. Those are scientifically made to reflect sounds properly. So you can't just go out and get a bunch of wood blocks and cut some slots in something and expect for it to work.
So how are those? So I've seen those, but I've never actually looked into those. Does anybody have any input on if those actually work or not?
So John, can you talk about them? Just talk about the ones that look like, think of it as a bunch of pieces of wood at different depths.
Yes.
What type of a diffuser is that?
Yeah. Do those do anything?
There's a number of types of diffusion. Let's get into diffusion. Diffusion is, first of all, diffusion is very important in the balance in a room. And what we talked about earlier, because sounds are directional, it's especially important to even out the power response of the room, not the inline measured frequency response, but the power response in the room. You need diffusion. You need diffusion, as Phil said, for a liver sound. People don't like anechoic chambers. So there's several types of diffusion. The type you're talking about with the slats, that is diffractive diffusion, and it works within an octave or two. And what happens is those vertical pieces of aluminum or very thin wood, and the gaps, the wells behind them, are tuned to a number of different frequencies, so that when sound comes in, it diffracts much like light would through a prism into those wells and comes back out at different angles, and has the effect of scrambling the phase and diffusing that sound. There's also the ones that you have in the room, mostly for between 200 and 7,000 hertz, that are, the radius is even. They're a cylindrical phase coherent diffuser. You can do that with a slice of a sphere. You can do it with a cylinder, but it's important that the radius stay the same, so that no matter what angle the sound comes in at, it's diffused the same.
Okay,
And
so if I bring up this picture, this is what we're kind of talking about.
The wood
It looks
block
like
one.
this
Okay,
weird kind of woody
Yes.
thing, right?
So
Tell me about these.
the quadratic residue diffusers,
There you go.
Wow,
Yes.
dropping the big names. Okay.
QRDs, they are made according to mathematical formulas to diffract the sound at a specific range of frequencies. And so there's the two big schools of thought around diffusion are phase coherent, which is the cylindrical and spherical side.
Which we'll show them in a second.
These guys should reflect the sound evenly without changing the relationships of the phase within that sound.
Wow.
The quadratic residue diffusion says we want to break the phase up, and what the actual practical benefits for each of them are: phase coherent diffusion retains more of the imaging, which is especially important in stereo. Quadratic residue makes the room sound a little bigger. It takes away some of the dimensionality. So what we found, and what I've particularly subscribed to over the last 5 years, in the mid-range, use phase coherent diffusion, cylindrical or spherical, because what that does is it gives you a much better image. Your stereo imaging, your surround imaging, your Atmos imaging, far better with a phase coherent diffuser. But from say 5 to 6, 7,000 hertz and up, use a chaotic or a quadratic residue diffuser, one that scrambles the phase of it. So you get the benefit of both. At higher frequencies, you're now scrambling the phase, and it fools the brain into thinking the room is a little bigger than it is, which is a nice effect. In the mid-range, the phase coherent diffusers give you that imaging aspect. And then, of course, below the room crossover, you're trying to get the diaphragmatic bass absorber in there.
Okay,
And then
so-
some absorption, not a lot, but
So
some.
let's talk about this. Now, this is a lot of times if you're going to get to the point where you're going to use multiple types of diffusers,
And your room has
curved,
both.
quadratic, absorption, you're probably going to invest. And now it's time to talk to somebody like John, who can talk to you, look at your room, and figure out how to blend it into your lifestyle, right? So if you look at the slides here, they had all of these different tools plus the ones that he had mentioned.
We're missing one.
But the ones that we have, which are kind of the
Yep.
slot.
ML.
So this is actually the room.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
And the way that he did
I
was
can
he wanted to make sure that we did not mess this up. So depending on the color, it was the type of panel that we're going to be using. So the blue ones were wrapped absorption. So if Cam walked over there and knocked on that wall, it seems like he's just knocking on I'm not a mattress, but just a soft surface.
Yep.
It's
right?
a sponge kind of a.
Exactly.
Yes.
Sponge.
Then he said, okay, we need the green are kind of the diffusers that you would see that have the slots in them that we were talking about. Kind of like picture a high-end version of what's behind me now, a much higher end version. If you switch this back to me, you can't see, you gotta go widescreen, right there.
Yeah.
You'll see it's got slots in it.
Mhm.
And so it's a much more higher mathematical calculation of that, right? And then the last one,
So that's what I was going to ask about. So when we had this installed, what, 3 years ago, was it? Back then, those were a custom design prototype.
Yes.
yeah,
So that's a full-fledged mass production piece now.
We still, I'm full disclosure, I am no longer with Acoustic Geometry,
Right.
but they will make them for you. One of the problems is that they tend to weigh a lot for shipping. But,
this was
Yeah,
semi full of stuff.
yeah.
They were
Add
heavy.
a little weight to it. Yeah.
That's called a maximum length sequence diffuser. And so
Yeah.
what it does is
MLS, high
it does
frequency.
exactly what I was talking about.
Yes.
It spreads out sound chaotically by phase at 6,000 hertz and up. And what that does is it now gives the room a more spaciousness to it while retaining that curved surface diffusion for imaging.
Gotcha.
And they weigh a lot. Sorry.
I did not know what MLS meant.
Yeah.
I just knew it
Those
was
are- those are
I've
the-
been calling them MLS high frequency diffuser, so I'm glad
Yeah.
now I'm gonna have to write
yeah.
that down what it
That's
actually
exactly-
means.
They are.
See,
They,
but he paid attention because he had to hang them all. So
you're exactly right.
and then the last ones, of course, are the curved ones, which
Yep.
if he switches back to Cam, there's kind of a curved one.
Oh my
Don't
gosh.
kill yourself.
Oh no. See, that's because I should have never brought it in.
You can't see it, haha.
Oh.
Don't trip.
Yeah, too late.
There's a curved one back over there. You still can't see him. Yeah, there he is. So it's a curved diffuser. So basically, this was a giant puzzle piece, right?
Stand by.
And we also did the same thing for.
Oh, no,
which
I
one?
can't.
What are we trying to do? He's gonna. We'll keep. Yeah. Producer Nick will actually clean up while we come back over here. So we had this whole system, and don't worry about it. Come sit down. He'll come clean. He'll come back and do it.
Instead of me crossing from the
Oh.
camera.
So Cam spilled on
No, I didn't.
Yeah,
Fake
you
news.
did. He knocked over his thing. So what you need to know is there's a wide variety of acoustic panels and treatments you can use. Absorption, diffusion, and even what we're going to talk about later, which is the ones that you actually use for bass. And all of these provide a tool. Now, one of the guys was asking, High Finest, I like that name, was asking any insight about ART, and which is direct active room treatment. This is actually, that's going to be coming on select Denon and Marantz AVRs and separates in the next few months. And basically the Marantz and Denon receivers that will support this feature have 4 subwoofer outs. The way that Dirac active room treatment works is, as John mentioned, bass is finicky in a room. Depending on where you're sitting, you're going to get peaks and nulls based on how that frequency interacts in your particular space. So there's ways to try to absorb or mitigate that. By using multiple woofers or 4 subwoofers in a room, which is what we do a lot, each sub has their own, based on their position, has their own peaks and nulls in the room, and they tend to smooth each other out. So as you add more subwoofers, you automatically normally get a smoother bass response, which is why we tell people.
You may also automatically lose neighbors.
Exactly. But we always tell people, and I tell people all the time, it is better to have 4 10-inch woofers than 1 18, because you're more likely to get, number one, those woofers are going to pressurize the room at a greater extent because it's just about cone area, and number 2, they're all going to work together to kind of help even out things.
Well, the other thing that is a subject of, I think, one of the other videos is subwoofer placement is critical, and you can't put all the subwoofers in the same measurement from each.
People stack 4 of them in a row. Don't do that, because all you're doing is taking all the problems and making it 4 times bigger.
That's
so
hilarious.
4 in 4 different locations. So bass control, for those who don't know, with Dirac, they start using the 4 subwoofers even more to kind of work with each other to try to smooth out the frequency response. Active room treatment, what it does is, if you have a big system, like in our theater, we have a 9.4.6, and pretty much all of the 15 speakers on the floor, and actually everything, and even the speakers in the ceiling, are capable of playing bass. And what they do is they work in conjunction with the subwoofers to help even out the bass. So John, the best way to think of it is the rear surround, the surround back, surround back, the surround, the subwoofer, the rear height will all work together. So think of it as everything acting as a bass trap for the subwoofer.
So brings up a couple of points. First of all, I really dislike the word bass trap, but everybody uses it.
Bass absorption, sorry.
No, it's everybody's free to use the term. It gives sort of a weird impression. So what most electronic measure and correct systems rely on is a certain amount of treatment in the room to begin with. And as I said before, the brain is really capable of forming great imagery from sound. You just need to give it a chance. And these systems are much the same. If you'll treat the room a little bit, if you'll do first reflection points, if you'll do some diaphragmatic absorption in the low end, then you're not giving these systems too much to deal with. You're giving them the rest of the correction, and they get very good at this, and they've gotten much better psychoacoustically over the years. But we still recommend the physics and the timing of actual acoustic treatments in a room, because what a lot of the problems are based on is not frequency response, it's based on timing.
Okay, so let's real quick, there's a couple of questions, and so let's go back to the basics again. So Dwayne was asking, if you bring up Dwayne's question, the hardest thing about room treatments is, how to get started. What product should I use? How do I know if I need room treatment? And like I said, that way my room is open to the hall. Okay, so he's talking about his room open in the hall going into the stairs. The quickest way I would tell you is, I don't want to be as basic as possible. Clap your hands. If I clap my hands in here, there is a little bit of space. There's just a tiny, but if I clap my hands and it sounds like, you can hear like you're clapped like multiple times, or it just seems smeared, that's a pretty good indication that you may need some treatment. Now, that's only where you clap your hands at that particular point.
Yep.
What I would suggest would be use the mirror And like this is cavemanish. You know, we want to use all the higher end pieces. But the first thing that I always do is if I run the mirror around the room like we talked about. Most rooms, I don't care what room you have, are gonna have first reflections.
That's all I was going to say. You're
You're always
going to
need that.
point.
And the easiest thing not the easiest, the quickest thing to tackle, the less mathematical thing to tackle is going to be those first reflections, which are going to impact the strings of the guitar, the high frequencies of something, the vocals, the female vocals, those types of things.
What's the saying? First and worst?
First and worst.
Get
exactly.
that first reflection point taken care of.
So the first thing I would do is grab my little mirror and do our mirror trick, right?
So
now,
two really good points here.
Yeah.
Soundproofing and room treatments are two different things.
Oh,
Right.
Somebody get a hold of us at one point that wanted to soundproof their room, but they had an open stairway. They had an open wall. Can't be done.
Yeah, so soundproofing and room treatment, two different things.
Completely different. So if you're looking to keep the sound inside a room, you got to make the room. You got to put a wall there.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's a big distinction, but most people say, well, I want to soundproof my room, so I want to put up some panels.
That's not it.
No, that's like stopping a water leak with a couple of Picassos on the wall.
Exactly.
It's not going to work that way.
So for example, for this room for sound treatment, the door itself is like this. It's a bank vault basically. And the walls are thick and it floats and all sorts of things to try to keep the sound from permeating the entire building. So if I go back to the room acoustics, I do my mirror.
First reflections.
I tape where everything would be, right? Of course, it would be great if you can go out and get some sort of acoustic panel. If you bring up the slide here and you go out and get some sort of acoustic panel, right? You can actually make acoustic panels. And there's a whole lot of videos on how to make acoustic panels using readily available material, right? So, and of course, you can go to Acoustic Geometry. You can go to a lot of different sites to do that. Bare basic. If you can, try to put something there that could kind of break up, it's not gonna be perfect, kind of break up or absorb. So for example, one of my first reflections is my window, because I had a sliding door. And there are companies that make really heavy dual layer curtains, right? Is it an absorption? Is it? No. But did it make a massive difference when I closed those curtains? Yes. You know, even so, try to find. So first is, how can I tackle it? If you could put a rug there, if you could put curtains there, if you could put something to kind of soften that sound, that's gonna be helpful. Of course, because half the time you aren't given the opportunity to just randomly buy fancy equipment, fancy absorption panels. But panels for this high frequency stuff is not insanely expensive.
Yeah,
it's when we start getting into diffusion and bass control is where things get more costly.
The most cost-effective
panels.
Yeah, those fiberglass panels are easily the most cost-effective way to start dealing with a room.
Yeah, you can spend a couple $100.
They have cloth covering so the fiberglass doesn't make you itch for weeks. They're inexpensive and they work really well. One quick caveat is that if you get a 1 inch or 2 inch thick piece of fiberglass with fabric wrapped around it, they're not expensive. Mount it 1 inch away from the wall. Hang it on a little thing so that it's spaced an inch from the wall. It'll be effective down to a lower frequency than if you just put it flat against the wall.
Okay, so spacing it off.
Smart.
So I learned that from you and Eric McBride, John, that if you took a panel and gave it some air gap, it makes the panel more effective. So you can buy a thicker
lowers
panel.
The frequency at which it works. It drops it almost an octave.
Yeah, so you could buy a thicker panel, or you could space the panel off the wall.
Yep.
So a couple of $100 if you already to dramatically improve your sound. I think I've seen acoustic panels with artwork on them. You can get on sale, or at a lot of the places like Acoustic Geometry or Glick Acoustics, make them, and you could spend a couple of $100 and it. Like I have a King Kong. Cam seen it. It's a King Kong thing in my
I'm so
theater.
not shocked.
Yeah, it's a cool
He's
Art
all
Deco.
not
It's a cool Art
surprised.
Deco King Kong, but it's basically a giant acoustic panel because my wife was not going to let me just put a big piece of gray there.
You know,
right?
you have a certain presence, Phil.
He's all not surprised.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, and that's a good point because, you know, there's a lot of ways of dealing with it. If somebody has a tapestry collection, you can do the same thing. Just bring it out from the wall an inch or so. More than an inch won't do any good. Just an inch. And that kind of fabricy, carpety type can be batik or it can be whatever. Will also knock down some of the reflections. You can do all kinds of things. And in fact, if you get carpeting or area rugs in a room, that'll help a little bit. You can hang a rug on the wall, as Phil said, if you want to try that. Give it a shot because in many ways, it's worth the money that you're going to spend on an inexpensive fabric covered fiberglass panel. They give you a lot more bang for the buck than a lot of other things you could do to your system.
Exactly. I'd rather have people. I know the audiophiles would lose their mind. I would rather have you spend $300 or $400 or $1,000 to upgrade your acoustic treatments than to step up $1,000 from a $2,000 pair of speaker cables to a $3,000 pair of speaker cables. You're gonna get a much bigger bang for the buck. A $500 pair of cables, and then spending $500 in acoustic treatments is going to give you a better bang for your buck in most rooms than a $1,000 pair of cables. So as he says, you can work your way up. To make it easy, actually, for those who are just trying to figure it out, and we talk about the fact that you can buy these acoustic panels quite inexpensively. If you go to the slide, Nick, a couple of companies like Glick Acoustics, Acoustic Geometry actually make like kind of a little basic room kit that says, hey, here's a couple of panels you're probably going to need to tackle some of the more common areas. And of course, it's like buying a value pack, right? You probably get a little bit of a discount when you buy them all. And of course, if you have any questions, you can talk to the team. You can do. I'm getting ready. I have a couple of panels that I had made. That one has my daughter's portrait on it, and the other one has my son's portrait on it. And those are the ones that I use in my room as well, because so there's lots of ways to do it. So, like you said, tapestries, rugs, heavy carpet, acoustic panels. You can do this with stuff that looks good, that is not exceedingly expensive. Now, the one that does get expensive is when we start getting into base treatments. Actually, before we get started, somebody was asking about the couch being at the back of the wall, against the back wall. True Warrior. True, I'm in that position as well. In my theater space, my couch is slapped up against the wall as well. A lot of times when you put a couch up against the wall, the main thing is the bass frequencies are enhanced or overly enforced. And sometimes you can get kind of a boomier sound. So that's more where you get into bass control could help with that, as well as that's where acoustic digital room composition comes in, because it can help you basically turn down that kind of peak when it comes to the bass. I will tell you, in movies, most people aren't complaining that you get like a 12 dB boost at like 30 hertz by having the couch against the wall. But when you're trying to play music, sometimes it can be a little too much. So there's that. So that's the thing.
Yeah, Phil, I'm actually in the same position as True Warrior here. So my couch is also against the back. So in a real world scenario, it's a rather small living room, maybe 300-400 square foot living room, which also has a TV on the front. The two speakers left and right, I mitigated it by putting something I got off Amazon just to start up, because the wife doesn't let me install all these things. So it's a hybrid diffuser absorber panel, two of those on each side that are above the speakers, just to get that first deflection done. Then when I do critical listening, I actually hang a fleece blanket, again fabric, over the TV to mitigate those. And then behind, in the corners, all the way up, there's like, because there's a wall behind, I've got these slightly larger hybrid ones that are kind of looking more triangular, that fit in the corner to get rid of the bass. And then additionally, behind the two speakers, because you mentioned that extra bass, I put also two bass traps right behind each, because the speakers are probably, what, half a meter, 40, 50 centimeters away from the wall. So something in there fits right behind it to remove that boominess. And it's not perfect, but for less than maybe $1,000 I've got something at least fixed. The other thing I need John's advice to put something behind me. What you see right there, something like that, that's nice looking, almost kind of diffuser, but that's just cosmetic basically.
Exactly.
And it does it at high frequency. 2 points. One is, you when you're designing acoustic spaces, and I've run into this a fair amount, you need to include the spouse, if there is one.
Why?
If you don't, there could be trouble.
Absolutely.
So it's really an important point, because this stuff needs to work acoustically, but it also needs to look good. I know people that have made their own treatments and they've botched it, but they work okay, but they look terrible. So they're not in the spousal marketplace. So the thing to do is to consult the person who will also be sharing that space, because they have some things they want to get out of that space too. It may well be color. So there's lots of colors that things can be wrapped in. And there's a lot of design decisions that can be made that don't cost too much or affect the acoustics badly. But please include them, because it'll help your lifestyle.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first thing,
That is great advice.
Yeah, I will tell you too that Frederick, during COVID, we were doing our webinars from our house. He's probably in the office now, and his backdrop, I had a pretty good backdrop with all the Marantz, but Frederick's backdrop put mine to shame with the diffusers and the old school Bowers speakers and stuff like that he used to have back there. So you can make it really pretty. Actually, this one here, if you bring up the slide, this is actually a Magnolia, a Best Buy Design Center. I guess they used to call it Magnolia, and then it became back a Best Buy Design Center. This is actually a treated room with one of the high-end acoustic door that to reduce the amount of sound control. Plus, it has diffusion, absorption, all the stuff in here, but it doesn't look like there's stuff in here. So this is just an example that you can do stuff that way. So tackle those first reflections first. Now, the one that I want to bring up, John, and we have them in this room, and I had never seen them before, was normally you see those little triangular bass. They always call them bass traps, like you see in this picture. And you say, don't call them bass traps. We have them in our building, not because we think they're super effective, but they just look cool, right? In some of the triangular ones that are in the room. He said, so John said, hey, if you really want to absorb bass, you need one of these. And there's two of these in the back of this room. So this is that crazy bass control thing. So why don't you talk a little bit about these? Because I think they're really cool.
Well, recent research over the past 5 years, I'll preface it, back up a little bit. A friend of mine named Ron Soro has a lab in Elmo, Washington, built into a never active nuclear power plant. The walls are 3 feet concrete and 5 feet concrete. And he's got the biggest test lab in the world. And what that enables him to do is test for low frequency absorption, which nobody else can do. So when I designed these, I wanted to test them, and I wanted to make sure they worked, because one of the truisms in physics is that a velocity-based absorber, fiberglass, cotton, mineral wool, does not work very well at 3 to 4 to 6 inches with low frequencies. You need 6 feet, 12 feet of this stuff based on the wavelength of the low frequency. So what we do with this, and other companies do this as well, is we make something called a diaphragmatic absorber. So you've got a cavity that's solid, the wood, and then you've got a membrane on the front of it that basically vibrates in sync with the low frequencies coming in. And they are most absorptive at the most troubling frequencies because that's where the most energy is. And so these basically work really, really well, as do the ones built into the back of the curved diffusers. So when I designed the curved diffusers, I didn't want them to be just a diffuser. Behind that curve there is another diaphragmatic low frequency absorber. So when you put those in a room, spread them out in the room and put the corner sorbers in the corners, they basically work down to about 42 to 43 hertz to mitigate those room modes. And they're far more effective than just about any other type of absorption. So membrane absorbers do work. They've been tested, they've been researched. There's another company whose name I can't use because it's proprietary. They also are making low frequency membrane absorbers, and their research is about to be released. So along with active low frequency control electronically, these tend to really work on the room modes and take down those resonances that are so prevalent below 200 hertz. They work really well, and the physics are sound. I think somewhere in the notes or somewhere there's a list of videos that I've done, and one of them is how bass works in rooms. And it's a 3.5-minute video, and it'll tell you a little bit about why diaphragms are better than a bunch of fabric or fiberglass or cotton.
So what we'll see
I've
is
seen that video.
So
That's
we'll
a
see,
good video.
We'll see if Nick can kind of in the chat copy and toss those into the chat so those who are on this call can actually see it. Now in this picture, you can actually see in the corner here. This is the back of the room. There's two of them, one on the left side, there's a set on the left side and a set on the right side. When I asked John how many do we need, because you always see these giant things that are like as tall, 6 feet, 8 feet tall, he was like, just two of them. That's all you need is two of them, and they work exceedingly well, right?
Well, the diaphragms are far more efficient than, again, what you would need in an equivalent amount of fiberglass would have to be 3 to 12 feet deep by 4 feet by 8 feet. Most people don't have that much space in their listening room. And so the side note is that a guy named Tom Hidley designed the original thing called a bass trap. It was a room 12 feet by 10 feet by 11 feet high, and it was filled with fiberglass. So those do work, but you need an enormous amount of space for them to work. These are a lot more efficient.
Yeah, and like I said, so these are just this stuff is really like technical. They're really, really cool. I would say for many people, if you have an AVR, a Marantz or then an AVR, the quickest one after proper speaker subwoofer placement, the best thing to do after that would be digital room compensation. Oh, we talked about the mirror trick. I'm going to give you another caveman-y type subwoofer trick, and it is called the subwoofer crawl.
I knew it.
Oh yeah.
So this is about as caveman as you get. What you do is you basically say, I'm going to be sitting here in the room. Say it's the couch right over there. What you do is subwoofers are heavy beings to move around. So by yourself, it's actually easier to put the subwoofer basically where you're going to be sitting, right? You have to move your couch. That's the part that sucks. You may have to move your couch, but you can put the subwoofer where you're going to be sitting.
Or put it on the couch. I've seen people do that.
Yeah. Then you crawl. Yeah. Actually, Jeff Clark stuck it on top of the couch.
He put it on his couch.
Yeah. And wife will kill you, but you can probably do that. Then what he did was he called it the crawl because you want to be down where the woofer is going to be, which is on the floor. And what you did was he crawled around the room until he found, and then you play something that has not just one boomy bass note, because what you end up with is just one great note and everything else is going to suck, but something that has a song that has like maybe a bass that's going up and down, or something that you're familiar with that has lots of different bass frequencies. And you crawl around the room and you'll be amazed. You will find one spot that absolutely sucks and you will find spots that work really, really well. You mark that spot and then you put the subwoofer there. That's a quick start. So between the mirror to find the first reflections and crawling around to find the best place for the subwoofer, that'll get you kind of started, right? We're gonna do a whole nother session on, and I'm probably gonna have Eric McBride or one of our friends come in to talk about how far out from the wall does that speaker go? You know, how far apart, how wide should they be? That's a whole nother conversation, which we'll cover at a later date. But the crawl in the mirror works really well. So let's answer some more of these questions.
Yeah, Dwayne was asking how important is treating the ceiling?
Very.
You know, what we didn't talk about?
What?
So we're answer the question, but for our ceiling, we have a silk metal absorption panels.
No, those are fusion.
I mean, diffusion panels.
Is it diffusion? Actually, that's just a hole, right?
No. It's an absorber, actually.
Oh, it's an absorber.
Yep.
Yeah, he put them in. So this room, actually, we didn't talk about that. It actually, there's certain panels in this drop ceiling up here that John manufactured that actually, we have them in our theater as well.
In the theater as well.
And actually, our theater, by the way, has absorption. Our theater has the corner sorbers. Our theater has the ceiling room treatment. So
your theater has about 130 dB at 30 hertz.
It plays loud. So
it's got some good frequency. Yeah. The things that you have in your ceiling are there for two reasons. One is they look really nice. They're called silk metal. They're micro perforated aluminum, and those micro perforations act as a really great broadband absorber. And so you can drop them in if you got a couple of inches of airspace beyond it. They work really, really well because they're broadband. They don't work just in an octave or two. The reason we didn't put diffusion up there is, I believe, and I don't want to cast dispersions, but the design committee said, no, it's not going to happen. So some of those that look a little different are actually ceiling absorber panels that are not fiberglass or rock wool or anything else. It's basically micro perforated aluminum.
Yep.
So what do you do with vaulted ceilings then?
You know what? Ceilings are a whole nother thing. There's people with A-frame ceilings and vaulted ceilings. What we've done occasionally is we try and match the paint color with a fabric color that goes over the fiberglass absorption panels. You can also put in silk metal as long as there's an inch or two of airspace behind them. The other thing you can do, and we've done this also in a couple of rooms, depending on what's on the walls, we have a room where we designed the curved diffusers to look like columns. And we continue those columns up the vaulted ceiling so that it'll look like just a continuous, not a cathedral, but it'll look like a design element of the room. So that the diffusion on the ceiling looked very much, you know, we had to bevel the things and it was a lot of work, but it worked really quite well. The problem with the ceiling, and if you look at first reflection points, reflections come off of hard, flat surfaces and they mess with the direct sound. What we're trying to do is reduce the energy of those flat surface reflections, not get rid of them, just reduce them. So whatever you can do, in some cases, people will put kind of a ripple effect thing on their ceiling, or they'll put something that works dimensionally. But keep in mind that those pieces of wood that people put up basically only work at about 10 to 20,000 hertz. They don't work at the range at all.
What we did, to be really simple, in this room, because it had a drop ceiling, we used these. We have two other theaters. We had two other spaces that were absolute horrible for sound when we moved in. And what we did there is that we're using snow sound panels. And we tackled basically just the first reflections. We have these beautiful circular looking ones that are on the walls that look like art that cancel the ones on the side. Their panels are super thin. And we have a 4 foot by 4 foot by probably 6 foot panel that's on the ceiling, painted. That's the same color as the ceiling, and it's amazing. And then we put carpeting in, and it's amazing how much of a difference that actually made.
Ceiling clouds are very handy. You can hang absorbers, and you call them clouds.
Yeah.
The thing that we got to keep in mind, and we'll come right back to, you say, caveman thinking. Really what you're after is improvement. Is there such a thing as the perfect acoustic environment? Well, for what? Are you recording symphonies? Are you recording bass drums? The best acoustic space is one that improves the acoustic problems. The best we can do is improve the space. Will it be perfect? By the time you get the improvements in and the speaker set up and everything working in the subwoofers, by that time your brain will acclimate to it and give you a much nicer sound. So try to improve it. You may not be perfect, but you're going to be a long ways toward better sound.
And there's actually a couple of more questions, a couple more comments before we let you guys go that I thought were pretty funny. So, and True Warrior, and I have discovered this too. He said he found that Christmas trees diffuse pretty well a couple of months through the year. That happens in my room. My room my main living room is a living room, dining room, kitchen. And he's seen it camp, vaulted ceilings, hardwood floors, the whole back of the house is glass. It is it bounces all over the place. When we put the Christmas tree in, you're like, wow, it actually sounds better in here, you know? So my wife's like, why is the Christmas tree still up in March? I'm like, because it makes the stereo sound better. She's like, take it down. So
until those needles dry out completely,
it's the plastic Christmas
fall
tree.
Off the tree.
You know, and then the other thing that Dwayne brought up, because Dwayne is one of my men, he brought up this, like I talked about the subwoofer crawl. Works best and works pretty much with one sub. When we start putting multiple subs in a room, that is where it gets a little bit more tricky, because now if I sub, how I do this is going to interact. So maybe it would be a nightmare. Maybe you could subwoofer crawl the first one, then put the new other sub up there and subwoofer. I don't know. The best way to do it, that's where you want to get into Odyssey and stuff like that. But as you add 4 or 5 subs to 2, 3, 4 subs to the room, the bass starts to improve anyway. So the quickest way to improve your bass, and Dwayne will love me when I say this, buy more subs.
Okay, so a really quick way for subwoofer placement, if you don't want to get into a lot of really deep stuff and measurements and everything else, remember that in room dimension talks, so if you've got a room that's 18 feet long by 12 feet wide, don't put the sub at the 6-foot point on the 12-foot wall. That's exactly where the room's null point for that dimensional wavelength is. Don't put it at the 9-foot point on an 18-foot wall. Put it off. Put it 2/3 of the way. Put it at 2/5 of the way. Do some odd thing so that your subwoofers are not at some even quarter or half length of one of the room dimensions. It's a lot easier that way.
Yes,
makes sense.
Makes sense. So, I mean, we could go on with this forever, but I do want to point out, John has retired, if you bring up the slides, but if you go to both the Glick Acoustics or Acoustic Geometry, I suggest you right now, after we get done with this, type in Acoustic Geometry, or if you look at the links, Nick was nice enough to put them into the chat. Go watch those videos. John does a very good job explaining reflections and stuff like that using Nerf guns. Using Nerf guns. If you can't understand a concept with a guy running around with a Nerf gun, I don't know what to tell you. Okay.
It was a lot of fun. That's all.
So check out those particular things. It seems like this topic we could cover. Last time we did it, we were on the phone. We were on there for 3 hours. Cam would kill me. My wife would kill me if we do that today. So we are going to come back and revisit this maybe on for speakers. But if I was going to say wrap it up, the first thing is try to tackle the first reflection. Yep. By trying to put something there, which in the easiest way to tackle the first reflection first is probably absorption. Because diffusion requires a little bit of mathematics, you know, or a little bit, the product's going to be higher. Absorption with, you know, things you have around the house that maybe would absorb sound, then work with absorption panels, you know, because that's the best bang for your buck. And also things like you said, throw rugs, things, and then try to fit try to correct all the first reflections with side walls, back walls, ceiling, all that stuff. Side walls first, then I'd probably go side walls. If I could do the floor and the ceiling, would be great. Then I would go to the back, this wall and that wall. But the left and right walls, fix those first. Okay.
Also, one thing, the reflections with the mirror, you can see where the tweeter is. Another great place for absorption is a 90-degree angle to your seating position, because you're going to get slap echoes between those parallel walls. Put a pair of absorber panels exactly opposite your ears on the walls. That works really well. Added to first reflection points.
It's interesting. Hot Toddy says that I have an echo, and we're trying to sort that out. But when the recording of this, we'll see if it's actually in the recording when we get done. So
yeah, it's because we're using a live stream software, and then we're retransmitting it on YouTube. There's a bit of a lip sync. It's not too bad, but it depends on the connection. So
the recorded version of this hopefully will be better. And next time we'll make sure, Hot Toddy, that we work on that, because I think we've had this.
We'll fix it in post.
If we've ever had that problem before, but this normally we're in our studio, but I challenged Nick to bring everything from our studio down here, and that adds a whole level of complexity to it. Okay.
But better speakers there, though. You've got much nicer speakers than in your.
Exactly. The backdrop is the backdrop is a not an echo, a lip sync issue. That's what I meant. That's what I meant. The lip sync, a timing issue.
Yeah.
So we'll sort that out. So so first reflections first, using materials around the house, acoustic treatments. Start with diffusers, because that's the least expensive. I mean, absorption. That's the least expensive way to go, right? Bass is challenging.
It is.
So if you can do it by proper placement of a single subwoofer or multiple subs, that would, and then if it's an audio system like a surround sound system, they have Dirac or some sort of Odyssey built in. We're starting to looking at, you're starting to see systems that are adding digital room compensation to hi-fi pieces, because people realize that if it works for stereo, I mean for surround sound, it's probably beneficial for hi-fi. Check out, like I said, those additional room acoustics trainings that are available on Acoustic Geometry and Glick Acoustics. Or if you really want to go back and go down the rabbit hole, check out our series on acoustic on bass subwoofer placement, and a really detailed two-part on acoustic treatments with John from back in the COVID days. If you really want to go there, we went there. And then actually, John, you came and visited.
Yes.
And there's a video where we go through every aspect of this room and how this room was designed. So if you go back and look back at our older training sessions on this learning channel, on this channel, you will see that as well.
You know, Phil, I never saw that one. You have to send me the link.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice.
Okay. Excellent. So we should actually do that again. So, and of course, make sure that you tell other people and you like and subscribe, so we can, because I want to continue to do these. We are looking for topics to cover, and not only in these videos, but maybe little 5-minute how-tos. So if you have ideas, please put those into the chat, so we figure out what things we should actually cover.
Yes. What do you want to see?
Exactly. So after CEDIA, we're going to come back and we should do another one on how to place 2 stereo speakers. And then maybe we can dive a little bit. We can do a whole session just on bass, because I think bass is going to require its own session all by itself. All right?
Got to have bass. You got to have bass.
Got to have bass.
Okay.
Love bass.
Everybody's asking me about Polk. Hey, man. William, if I tell you what's coming new, you'll never see me on this camera again. They'll be like, where's Phil? Well, Phil told him where all the new products are coming, and I don't know where Phil is now. Well, Phil is retired. Drinking beer with John.
Phil got retired.
Phil got too enthusiastic about the new product. Exactly. So,
oh, that's funny.
Yeah, but we are, I will tell you I'm excited about what's coming, things that are coming next year, but I can't tell you about it. But we do have, yeah, but thank you, Frederick and John, for coming. I know this is always a complex topic, but hopefully you have gleaned a little bit from this session, and maybe it just sparked your interest. And make sure you go back and bring up that slide and visit these 2 sites and check out the sites as well. Also, you have links on these on your site as well, isn't it? John Calder at johncalder.com.
It's johncalder.net, but it's my music channel. But if you want to get a hold of me, you can do it. There's a contact form there on johncalder.net. Okay,
johncalder.net. Okay, so that's a good way if you want to check, keep an eye on John and learn some more stuff. And there's so much more we could talk about, but we just have. I don't want to be here forever. It's time for me to go home and have lunch. And then Frederick can go have breakfast. And John, are you on the East Coast? You're on the East Coast.
I'm in Minnesota, and I have some Balvenie 12-year-old single malt Scotch waiting for me.
Hey. Well, we don't want to hold you off for your Scotch. All right. So as always, Frederick, thank you. Kam, thank you. Nick, thank you for running the session as well. And
thanks,
John,
guys.
After Cedia, we're going to come back and visit bass, and then we'll talk about all the different solutions for bass as well. And I would love to have you come on for that. All right. So take care, everyone.
Nice to see y'all.
We'll talk to you soon.